Have you ever wondered how the Vietnam War, one of the most controversial conflicts in modern history, actually began? To fully comprehend the origins of this complex dispute, we must travel back to the French colonial period in Vietnam. In the late 19th century, the French seized control of Vietnam, incorporating it into their burgeoning colonial empire. This marked the beginning of nearly a century of foreign domination, which profoundly shaped Vietnam's political and social landscape. The Vietnamese people, however, were not passive subjects of colonial rule. Resistance simmered beneath the surface, gradually coalescing into a full-fledged nationalist movement. The figurehead of this movement was a man named Ho Chi Minh. Inspired by the principles of self-determination and socialism, he founded the Viet Minh, a coalition of groups united in their desire for Vietnamese independence. With his charisma and unwavering resolve, Ho Chi Minh emerged as a beacon of hope for those yearning for freedom from colonial rule. However, the path to independence was far from smooth. After World War II, as the French sought to reassert their control over Vietnam, the Viet Minh launched a revolutionary war for independence that lasted for nearly 9 years. The culmination of this struggle was the Geneva Accords in 1954, a diplomatic agreement intended to bring peace to the region. Under the Accords, Vietnam was temporarily partitioned along the 17th parallel into North and South, with Ho Chi Minh's communist forces in control of the North and a pro-Western regime in the South. The Accords also stipulated that nationwide elections would be held in 2 years to determine the country's future. However, the prospect of a unified Vietnam under communist rule was unacceptable to the United States and its allies. Fearing the spread of communism in the Cold War context, they supported the South Vietnamese government, leading to a refusal to hold the agreed-upon elections. So the stage was set for a major conflict, with the country divided and both sides unwilling to back down. As tensions grew, the United States began to involve itself more deeply in Vietnam. But why? The answer lies in the geopolitical climate of the time. The fear of the domino theory had taken a firm hold on the American psyche. This theory suggested that if one country in a region fell to communism, neighboring countries would follow suit, like a row of dominoes toppling over. The United States, committed to containing the spread of communism, saw Vietnam as a crucial front in this ideological battle. In the early 60s, the Gulf of Tonkin incident played a pivotal role in escalating U.S. involvement in Vietnam. On a fateful night in August 1964, 2 U.S. destroyers reported being attacked by North Vietnamese naval vessels in the waters of the Gulf of Tonkin. Although the details of the incident were later called into question, at the time, it was used as a pretext to authorize President Lyndon B. Johnson to take any measures he believed necessary to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. And so, the war escalated, with the U.S. launching Operation Rolling Thunder, a sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnam. The U.S. military also introduced new strategies and tactics, including the use of chemical weapons like Agent Orange and napalm, and a strategy known as Search and Destroy, aimed at flushing out Viet Cong fighters from the South Vietnamese countryside. Meanwhile, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces, though outmatched in terms of firepower, used guerrilla warfare tactics to great effect. They utilized the dense jungles and complex network of tunnels to launch surprise attacks and then disappear, sapping the morale of American soldiers. This period marked the beginning of a brutal and destructive war. The battlefields were no longer only military targets. Villages and towns were often caught in the crossfire, leading to a significant loss of civilian life. As the war escalated, it became increasingly brutal and destructive, with no clear end in sight. While the conflict raged in Vietnam, a different kind of battle was taking place back in the United States. This battle wasn't fought with guns or bombs, but with words, protests, and a growing sense of disillusionment. The anti-war movement began to take shape around the mid-60s. It was a diverse coalition of students, pacifists, intellectuals, civil rights activists, and ordinary citizens, all united by their opposition to the war. This movement was no small voice in the corner. It was loud, and it was powerful. It echoed through the halls of universities, spilled onto the streets, and reached the highest levels of government. One of the most significant events that fueled the anti-war sentiment was the Kent State shootings in May 1970. National Guardsmen opened fire on a crowd of student protesters, killing 4 and wounding 9. This tragic incident shocked the nation, leading to a surge in anti-war sentiment and massive protests. Another pivotal moment was the publication of the Pentagon Papers in June 1971. These classified documents revealed that the government had systematically lied to the public about the progress and justification of the war. The release of these papers caused a seismic shift in public perception, further eroding the trust between the government and its people. The draft, or conscription, was another major point of contention. Many young Americans were being forced to fight in a war they didn't believe in, causing widespread resentment and leading to draft dodging and resistance. As the war dragged on, public opinion continued to shift. The initial support gave way to skepticism, then to outright opposition. The war was not only costing lives abroad but was tearing apart the fabric of American society at home. In essence, the Vietnam War was a war with two fronts, one in the jungles of Southeast Asia and one on the home front. The impact of the anti-war movement was significant. It changed the course of US politics and left an indelible mark on American history. As the war dragged on, it not only divided Vietnam but also caused deep divisions within the United States itself. Eventually, the unsustainable cost of the war, both in terms of lives and resources, led to its conclusion. But how did it end? The answer lies in the Paris Peace Accords, a complex series of negotiations that took place in the early 1970s. The United States, North and South Vietnam, and the Viet Cong all had seats at the negotiation table, each with their own interests to protect. After much deliberation, a ceasefire was agreed upon. The United States pledged to withdraw its forces, and in exchange, North Vietnam agreed to return American prisoners of war. On January 27, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, marking the official end of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. However, the peace was short-lived. Even as the last American troops left Vietnamese soil, the fighting between North and South Vietnam continued. The U.S., now a distant observer, watched as the conflict it once led escalated once again. The fall of Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam in April 1975, marked the definitive end of the war. The city was captured by the North Vietnamese army, effectively ending the hopes of a non-communist South Vietnam. The reunification of Vietnam under communist rule was a bitter pill to swallow for many. For the Vietnamese people, it was a time of mixed emotions. The end of the war brought relief, but it also brought the reality of life under a single communist government. For the United States, it was a period of introspection, as the nation grappled with the consequences of its involvement in a controversial and costly war. Despite the end of the conflict, the scars of the war remained, both in Vietnam and the United States. The echoes of this contentious period in history are still felt today, serving as a stark reminder of the costs of war and the enduring complexities of international relations. The Vietnam War left a profound impact on both nations, but what is its lasting legacy? When we talk about the Vietnam War, we cannot overlook the immense human cost. Millions of lives were lost, with countless others irrevocably altered by the physical and psychological wounds of war. In Vietnam, the scars of war still remain, both visible and invisible. One of the most devastating and enduring legacies of the war is Agent Orange, a herbicide used by the US military to defoliate the jungles and expose the Viet Cong. Decades later, the health effects of Agent Orange continue to be felt by the Vietnamese people, causing birth defects and a range of serious health problems. Adding to this, unexploded ordnance continues to pose a deadly threat in many rural areas. Despite ongoing efforts to clear these explosives, it's a chilling reminder of a war that officially ended over half a century ago. Across the Pacific, the war also had a lasting impact on the United States. It fundamentally altered the nation's foreign policy, prompting a more cautious approach to military intervention overseas. The war sparked widespread public distrust in the government, a sentiment that was further fueled by the release of the Pentagon Papers, which revealed the government's deception about the progress and goals of the war. One of the most poignant symbols of the war's legacy is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. The black granite wall, etched with the names of more than 58,000 American service members who lost their lives in the war, stands as a solemn reminder of the human cost of conflict. The Vietnam War was a complex and controversial conflict that continues to shape our world today. Its legacy serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of war, influencing not only how we engage in conflict, but also how we remember and honor those who served and sacrificed.